So, Sandra, why don't you start by introducing yourself to our students, our grid spacers, and talk about your work?
Hey, glad to. I'm Sandy Ferrari Disner. Actually, I graduated from Wellesley College as an undergraduate, so I was given the opportunity to study at MIT. I took my entire senior year at MIT and enjoyed it enormously. Lived in McCormick Hall. Happy memories of those days, which were very formative for me. I'm currently a professor of linguistics and forensic linguistics in particular at University of Southern California. But before that time, actually for the majority of my career, I worked in speech technology. I was asked to talk about the history of speech technology, and I can't give you anything like the detail that Jean France gave you, so I will just tell you a little bit about two companies that I worked for that were pioneers in text to speech, and perhaps shed a little bit of light on the kind of Wild West that it was back then. In 1981, when I was working on my dissertation in linguistics at UCLA, I was approached by an acquaintance, formerly an engineer at the university, to take a job with his new employer, Mattel, um, the toy manufacturer, which had just created a new division called Mattel Electronics. The company needed a linguist for its new text-to-speech devices, and my skill as an acoustic phonetician and also my multilingual skills uh, evidently appealed to them. Uh, my fellow graduate students were appalled at this. They said things like, "What? You're not going to look for an academic position? Or you're going to work for a toy company?" And finally, they'd say things like, "And what is a video game anyway?" Because they were completely unknown. We were the second in the market. I didn't convince any of my classmates of the worthiness of the project, but Mattel's first product in television, that's a mashup of intelligent and television, was one of the very first video games at all, and the very first talking video games. The first to offer a line. They weren't all talking, but they offered a special module and a special line of games that actually incorporated voice into the gameplay. Mattel realized that they could offer much more sophisticated and fast-moving gameplay if they presented the information, at least some of the information, auditorily, not just visually on the screen. Things like the number of advancing aliens and the number of seconds left and the time remaining to play. The product sold like hotcakes, earning hundreds of millions of dollars each year for the Mattel Corporation. Um, the speech chips in the Intellivision line, actually the IntelliVoice line, were developed by General Instrument of Long Island, New York. The synthesizer unit in the special speech module was able to store numbers, a few keywords, and a beautiful baritone reading of Mattel Electronics presents. And then, of course, each individual cartridge would give its own name. But most of the speech there was just stored, so it didn't have to be stored over and over again in the cartridges. The individual cartridges contained the title and some dialogue for each game. These were recorded in Hollywood by well-known voice talents, including members of the popular satirical group known as Firesign Theater, who were just insane. They were so funny. They were such great improvisers. And being a toy company, Mattel insisted on fun and lively voices, some in extreme pitch registers, growly low and squeaky high, and with wild flights of intonation. Unfortunately, the game cartridges were minuscule by today's standards. Most of them were 8K cartridges, and the really flagship ones had all of 12K. 12K! And not much room was left over after the game had been loaded onto those cartridges for us to squeeze a little bit of speech in there. We did splurge on our first product using almost all of our voice capacity on a phrase uttered by the onboard computer of a spacecraft tasked with shooting down aliens in outer space. Um, the phrase was, "Hello, Commander, computer reporting." But somebody got the bright idea of saying, why don't we make it a woman's voice? And why make it a sexy woman's voice? So we got an actress to say, "Hello, Commander, computer reporting," in this breathy, sexy way. It drove 14-year-old boys crazy, and it really boosted sales. The thought of a female onboard computer at your command was just more than people had ever seen before in a video game. The job of the staff linguists was to identify the representative portions of speech in the LPC output of our recordings and propagate them for as long as the steady state would allow us. So, of course, we favored calm, steady, low-pitched voices to be able to squeeze as much as we could onto the cartridge. But this was a source of constant conflict with the creative division of Mattel. They were a toy company. They wanted to cast ever more fun and lively voices. They had a growling Russian spy, and they had a southern, rural southerner saying, "B-17 bomber," um, which took up most of the cartridge. And then they also wanted the madcap laugh of Woody Woodpecker, as if we could do that. In my time at Mattel, I traveled the world to record voice talents in other languages. I worked on some truly fabulous video games, including several that remained on the list of best video games of all time for a decade, long after the demise of the company. And I had a lot of fun for a couple of years, but storm clouds were gathering. The $79 price tag, this was back in the 1980s, early 1980s, the $79 price tag of the IntelliVoice component alone suppressed the sale of all those IntelliVoice game cartridges. And on a larger scale, across the industry, a price war was developing as chips got cheaper and more people entered the market. And early computers were vying for us for market share. And let's face it, they offered more than just gameplay. They offered a computer. Price wasn't all that different. And then, of course, the famous E.T. the Extraterrestrial video game that was rushed to market by one of our competitors, Atari. They wanted to be sure to make it in time for Christmas 1982, was considered the worst video game ever made. And that soured the market on video games for the foreseeable future. Staff layoffs at Mattel began in the summer of 1983, and they continued until early 1984, when the Intellivision division, which had once produced half of all Mattel toys revenues, their operating income, I should say, was finally sold for a pittance. And in an interview about the video game industry, a vice president of Mattel was heard to say, "Well, there's no future in those things." I'd like to see what he thinks of the video game industry now, but he apparently thought that they were doomed in 1983. So I was out of a job. Let me shift to my second adventure in text-to-speech, not long thereafter. But I'll have to go back in time to tell you how this built up. Long before any of the Mattel shenanigans that I just told you about were taking place, back in 1971, there was a company called Telesensory Systems, founded by a group of Stanford engineers and scientists who developed a reading device for the blind. They called it Opticon. And it contained an optical character reader, which converted character images, the individual letters, into vibrations that could be read, as it were, with the fingertips of a blind person. It was much more versatile and certainly faster than waiting for Braille transcriptions to show up. You could, open your mail and read it instead of having somebody go to the trouble of transcribing it, weeks later. They did very well from 1971 to 1976, but in 1976, Ray Kurzweil, the real genius of the field in those early years, had entered the market with the groundbreaking Kurzweil reading machine, which output some rather rudimentary synthetic speech uh, rather than vibrations. Brilliant idea. But the telesensory people, fearing this incursion into their market, went on a hunt right away for some front end text to speech of their own, so that they weren't just asking people to read with their fingers, but to listen with their ears. The research ended right in your own backyard at MIT's Research Lab of Engineering, RLE, where Dennis Klatt had already created a software model of the vocal tract, and Jonathan Allen had crafted a set of letter to sound rules for English. The same system, the same software was prototyped for two very successful products in subsequent years, Klatt Talk and then Deck Talk. Even running on a newly designed Intel chip on the most advanced PDP computer of its day, actually an entire room full of computer power, MIT's early text-to-speech was very large and not very powerful. It took an hour for it to create just 1 minute of synthetic speech. So the telesensory engineers set about simplifying and refining the Klatt-Allen software to make it more efficient and thus more marketable. They eventually got it to work in real time, 1 minute for 1 minute of speech, with fewer computers involved. By late 1978, which was not all that long a development period, Telesensory's new OCR and text-to-speech device was being featured at trade shows. But the product was kind of buggy and it still was rather slow, mainly due to the rudimentary camera still used by Telesensory for its optical character reader. At least that's what my friends, the linguists, said about it, why it didn't succeed. You had to draw the handset very slowly across the page so that one letter after the other could be read. Improved hardware brought some noticeable improvements. Texas Instruments had come out with a signal processing chip that could perform its calculations at a much higher speed. So Telesensory switched to TI chip with a Klatt model loaded onto it. Maybe it was one of Gene Francis' chips. I'll have to ask him. By 1972, Telesensory was able to perform real-time text-to-speech with just a single 8x10 board. Some of the truly standout personages in all these efforts, I should mention them, were Forrest Moser, a Berkeley physics professor who created the world's first integrated circuit speech synthesizer in the early 1970s. He was on contract to Telesensory. There were project managers Robert Savoy and Gabriel Groner, and engineer Jim Caldwell, whose meticulous programming for the TI chip hastened the product to market even earlier than expected. But problems remained. Telesensory's OCR never overcame its low resolution and slow speed, and the project became, frankly, too much for a small special needs company to handle. So in 1983, the company spun off its text-to-speech division into a new company called Speech Plus, funded in part by its main customers, Canon, which used Telesensory's chips in its own line of talking computers. We heard about talking calculators, not talking calculators. We heard about those from Gene. It was kind of a fun but gimmicky product and fairly short-lived, at least the Canon version of it. And Westinghouse, that had planned to use Telesensory's text-to-speech in talking elevators all around the world. But it never progressed past a pilot program of putting text-to-speech into certain people mover devices in a few airports around the country. But once out on their own, Speech Plus concentrated on diversifying and improving its product line. It left behind the Allen letter-to-sound rules, and it tasked psycholinguist Jared Bernstein with formulating a much improved set of linguistic rules. The company began offering variable pitch and speaking rates, and its experimental testing found, to everybody's surprise, that a flat, monotone setting was the best of the entire range at capturing customers' attention. So a number of corporate clients were attracted to Speech Plus's rather creepy robotic voice for marketing reasons, certainly not aesthetic reasons. Another early adopter of Speech Plus's TTS was the renowned physicist Stephen Hawking, who was afflicted with a severe neuromuscular disorder known as ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And up until then, Hawking had been communicating by means of a fairly rudimentary letter and word selection device that had been crafted for him in his lab. But realizing that he needed something better as his fame grew, something that would allow him to speak aloud fluently at academic conferences and broadcast interviews, he visited Speech Plus right at our headquarters in Mountain View, California, and we gave him a board as a gift. In every successive year, the company tried to upgrade Hawking to a better, more natural sounding product. But he wasn't interested, always replying that his audience had gotten used to that mid-1980s product, kind of robotic, kind of nasal, as his own voice. And he felt that they would be jarred by a sudden shift to some other, snappier voice, more baritone, mellifluous voice. So he stayed with it until the end of his days, 25 years later. I should just add on a personal note that not long before that time, not too long before Hawking's death, I attended one of his talks at UCLA with my husband, who was himself in the late stages of ALS. And it was a very emotional moment for me when I heard that long abandoned speech product ring out in the UCLA auditorium. He never abandoned it. There was a brief flurry of enthusiasm when Speech Plus licensed its text-to-speech technology to IBM to be added to the entire line of IBM PCs. And I should point out that Dragon Systems did the same for its own speech-to-text device. But once our product had been adapted by IBM, it was never promoted much beyond that, and the license eventually lapsed. By the mid-1980s, the company slowly shifted its marketing to a new enhanced parametric synthesis system based on the digitized speech of a San Francisco radio announcer named Peter B. Collins, which was augmented by vector quantization. That much improved text-to-speech was considered a very, very high quality at the time and gained early adopters, such as one of the world's first GPS systems. They wanted it to read out street names to the driver. A major gaming company, Broderbund, the manufacturers of a highly successful translating device, the Instant Dict talking dictionary, an Italian car parts manufacturer. All kinds of people heard about us and licensed our product. We then contracted with universities and corporations overseas, including the Olivetti Corporation, the University of Madrid, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, to provide parametric text-to-speech for us in 4 additional languages: Spanish, Italian, French, and German. They'd all been working on the project, but we set new standards for them and they adopted it. All of these languages, all of these modules in 5 languages were painstakingly edited, tuned, and localized by Dr. Batsheva Melchin, herself a product of MIT's RLE, and her staff, a group that included me. One of my contributions, by the way, was a program for the correct pronunciation of acronyms on the page. So it would say MIT instead of MIT, and it would say PFLAG instead of FLAG. Much better than anything that's on the market today. I hear all kinds of clunky attempts by text-to-speech to read algorithms and abbreviations. And I keep saying, I solved that problem years ago. I on it, and it's in the hands of Microsoft. Why aren't they digging it up? It's theirs. Anyway, that's my beef. But anyway, we had all these great customers, but sales flagged, or at least didn't grow. And in 1990, the Speech Plus Board of Directors sold the company and all its patents to Centigram Communications, a voicemail company that was interested in Speech Plus's interactive voice response capabilities. Always in search of new markets, Batsheva, representing Centigram, went to Redmond, Washington to pitch a novel idea to the technical staff of Microsoft. She said, "Would you like to buy our email reader?" Now you have to understand, back then, most people didn't have laptops. They had a very expensive computer on their desk at work, and they went home for the weekend, and that was that, except messages were coming on email, and they didn't want to schlep back into the office. But yaha, if you had text to speech, you could connect it to a phone line and make it an email reader and dial up and say, "Who's called me over the weekend?" And if you had one of these products, you could read your email whenever you wanted. And Microsoft said, "That's a great idea." They loved it. And so they licensed it. We were thrilled. Microsoft put Centigram's text-to-speech on its Windows chip that was adopted by many different companies. And for a while, Centigram was producing millions of chips annually in 5 languages, with hopes for an even broader market ahead. And then another cloud appeared on the horizon in the form of a company called Lernout and Houseby. Maybe you haven't heard of it. It's an interesting story. Lernout and Houseby Speech Products was a private speech technology company supported by the Belgian government as a way of creating jobs for its multilingual population there. There were certain disadvantaged parts of the country that was full of people that were multilingual speakers and very able to speak Dutch and French and even English. Cushioned by an extremely large government grant, Lernout and Houseby approached Microsoft, our customer, our main customer, our millions of chips customer, and made an irresistible offer. "Accept our text-to-speech, free of charge, no strings attached." Microsoft accepted. Now, why wouldn't they? I mean, it was pretty crappy text-to-speech. Everybody hated how it sounded. It had this sort of nasal, whiny, somewhat accented English, and their other languages really never materialized to any great success. But it was free, and Microsoft wasn't all that invested in text-to-speech. It was just a feature, and if they can get it for free, why not? I mean, this was in the heyday of Microsoft. They were the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They could do whatever they wanted, but they obviously didn't want to give us the pittance that they were paying for our chips, and so they switched to Lernout and Houseby for free. And at that point, the Lernout and Houseby publicity office went into overdrive, and they started coming up with press releases that described the company as the sole purveyor of speech products to Microsoft Incorporated. This happened to coincide with Lernout and Houseby's initial public offering in 1995, which earlier had been predicted to yield pennies a share. And instead, with all this publicity about being the purveyor, they didn't mention purveyor for free, of speech products to Microsoft, the initial public offering opened at almost $12 a share. It was stunning. And it headed straight up from there. At its peak in the year 2000, Lernout and Houseby had a market capitalization of almost $10 billion. It used its revenues to buy up companies such as Dragon Systems, Dictaphone, Global Link, and Berkeley Speech, acquiring almost 400 software patents in the process. And along the way, it also acquired the text-to-speech division of Centigram. And almost immediately, our entire group was laid off, out of a job again. The party ended abruptly for Lernout and Houseby. Rumors of financial impropriety had been circulating for years, but had been largely brushed off by Wall Street. And the stock price kept climbing and climbing and climbing into the hundreds. And then the newly appointed CEO of Lerner and Houseby saw fit to visit his company's foreign subsidiaries. Um, in Korea and in Singapore, he discovered fictitious transactions and improper accounting practices. Everybody in the industry was saying, how are they getting, hundreds of millions of dollars of orders? We're scrambling for $2 million here and $1 million there. But they were the darling of Wall Street, and they were the purveyor of speech products to Microsoft, so nobody asked too many questions until it came to the attention of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Lerner was arrested, Mr. Houseby was arrested, the former CEO of the company, not the new one, because he seems to have been the one that alerted the SEC of these shenanigans. They were all arrested in what was considered one of the largest corporate scandals in American history. The company's stock plummeted immediately, and Houseby filed for bankruptcy in October of 2001. Most of the company's patents were acquired by a company called Scansoft, which was, I think, spun off by Xerox some years earlier. And that company eventually merged with and adopted the name Nuance. And it has since been acquired by Microsoft.
I have a question. Our audience is mainly engineers, so I was wondering what experience as a linguist you bring, and like if you could just elaborate to our audience like the nuances of speech that you as a linguist are more attuned to that like uh just a signal processor or someone else like that might not be.
Well, first, the overall, there's two different ways we do things. Number one is if there are speech characteristics like a too gravelly voice or a lisping voice, or something, we can call people's attention to those uh, speech characteristics, and they can perhaps change some of the parameters globally to
Mm.
avoid them. And also things like rate and intonation. We were, of course, always looking when I was working for Mattel, and all we could do was just pick out the representative um, glottal pulses that were then propagated. You could make better choices and make either a more compact or more nuanced speech signal output. Of course, if you had somebody saying "bay 17 bomb," or you had to pick, every other glottal pulse if you're going to track it correctly. So there were a lot of decisions to be made on the LPC from the LPC side of things. Um, Also, we would be listening for pops and clicks and mispronounced sounds. If we were, after all, we weren't concatenating syllables like AT&T was doing, but we nevertheless had some juncture issues or some rule issues that did come up with unpleasant sounds, and so we'd identify those and try to find other ways around it. And then we did a lot of, for example, for the foreign language modules, we had to do a lot of localization because we had to have, there were different abbreviations, different acronyms. For example, in French and Italian, they don't mind having big clusters like CSELT and Knucce. The Italian version of the federal research money came through something that was abbreviated as CNUCE. And in English, you might say, either spell it out or say CNUS, but they don't mind starting words with KNU, which doesn't happen in their ordinary words. And you just have to sort of recognize that and get the computer to pronounce it properly rather than just use the American standards for it. So we had all kinds of influence in all kinds of ways. We were certainly around when we were doing modeling of individual voices. We wanted to get the most. Um, we wanted to look at accent and mm, pitch and I mean regional accent and the speaking voice, trying to get something that could be synthesized most effectively. Women's voices were more difficult because they just have higher pitches, and you'll sometimes miss a form and peak entirely. Uh, of course, the Mattel people were always into having, the often a very stereotypically female voice that was much more difficult to synthesize. We were the ones that were saying we wanted to be understood. We don't care if it makes people smile. We just want to make it understood, and that's exactly the opposite of what the creative people wanted. I'll just make tell you one story if I have time that sort of encapsulates it all. The first product I worked on was a shoot 'em up in space game called Space Spartans, and the aim, as I mentioned earlier, was to shoot aliens out of space.
Mattel Electronics presents Space Spartans.
And we wanted them to say aliens very softly and smoothly without a lot of flights of intonation so we could synthesize it well and not waste too much space. Um, but of course, the creative people wanted to say aliens because it had to be matched with the numbers that were launched on the main module. So 16 aliens. Well, we did the best we could, but when you have an expressive speaker saying aliens, it hit it really hard. It almost sounded like there was an H at the beginning of it. And of course, the "ya" in the middle of aliens, the speaker said it so forcefully that he probably um, raised his tongue up to the palate, and it sounded like a G basically.
Mm.
So what sounded like aliens, aliens on the tape turned out, once we synthesized it on the EEPROM, to be heeligans. Heeligans. And my boss said, "What's that?" I said, "Oh my God, that was supposed to be aliens. Oh, we'll fix that. We'll schedule another recording." He said, "Sorry, too late. Christmas is around the corner. Do better next time." I was mortified. I said, "Oh my God, my first attempt at this, and I'm saying heeligans. Nobody's going to know what the hell that means." And I couldn't sleep for weeks. When it finally was put onto the market, and this was the days before blogs, people just had newsletters back then. They would issue the Mattel Electronics newsletter. I mean, the users would. These kids were saying, I shot down 45 Heeligans yesterday. Well, I shot down 95 Heeligans the week before. And I thought, oh my God, these people think that Heeligans is something. They think that it's a special characteristic, some special race of space invaders. They have no idea that it's a crappy way of pronouncing aliens.
Under repair, tracking computer 1/3 down. Computer destroyed. Aliens.
Just one last question. You said you had quite like some adventures in industry. Um, how do you think that's shaped your like view of academia or your journey in academia since that point?
Well, first of all, it gives me a lot of cred, and it also gives me a way to teach people about the importance of intonation and the importance of context, not just in English, but in English societies, but also in French and in German, Italian. Um, it's given me an appreciation for how very sensitive the public is to linguistic variation, how it can be used, very entertainingly. I mean, it made a lot of people happy. I never had to pay a babysitter in all my life because in all those early years, because people would volunteer to come over to my house, watch my kids, and play my video games, the new ones that hadn't been released. I actually thought I had to pay them because I'm a klutz. I couldn't get to the highest levels where I was supposed to be getting certain phrases added, but they were great. They would sit there play all afternoon and get to level 95 where I couldn't get past two or three. Um, but yes, it does basically show how linguistics isn't just in the academy, not just on paper, but in people's lives and can make a difference.
That's awesome. I'm sure, when you were starting out as a linguist, did you ever think this was going to be your path, or were you always,
Oh, absolutely not.
yeah,
I was going to be a translator. My first job out of college was as a State Department translator. But that was no fun because all you did was translate other people's words. You couldn't improve it. You couldn't make it less ambiguous or less boring. You had to absolutely say whatever drivel this State Department functionary had said, and I said that's not for me. So.
yeah,
Uh, but besides, video games hadn't been invented then. People weren't using linguistics for fun.
yeah.
It is fun.
That's an awesome, awesome niche to get into. I don't think I have any questions. So cool that you got to see Stephen Hawking using that technology.
Moving.
Um, yeah. Kevin, questions?
Yeah, Sandra, I have a quick question. You didn't get to work on the famous ET game by Atari, did you?
No, that was our competitors. We thought it stank. We realized it was going to tank the entire industry. I mean, there was also an issue of there were more people entering the market and all that, but that was there were people who did surveys that basically agreed with a Mattel vice president that this there's a limit to this technology. It's not going to get very good, and this is just an example of how it is when it's bad. Not They didn't realize that it was the worst game ever. Uh, they had ET coming. ET looked like an earthworm with this long brown head that sort of raised up, and it was just awful. We were, of course, very snotty and supercilious about it, but we didn't realize it was going to tank us all.
That's so funny. Just because, yeah, currently it's pretty infamous as being maybe the worst game ever made, and it's
It
nice
was.
to know that people at the time knew that as well.
Oh yeah, ours were really good. I mean, we had one game called Utopia that was a prototype for all. It sort of blazed a trail for all the sim games. You had your own kingdom. You could do whatever you wanted. You could, raise sheep. You could go to war. I mean, it was a wonderful game. And these things lasted into the 90s as among the top 100 video games, even though the plug had been pulled on them in 1983. Or actually 1984 was the early 1984 was when the company actually closed the line. But um, people that had them cherished them. They were really great games.
Yeah, I mean, I love retro gaming. Very thankful for Utopia because I'm a big fan of The Sims.
Oh, you know it.
Yeah.
And you can't compare it to today. Back then, there was like nothing but boop, boop, beep, beep. And then there was Utopia. And then there was 17 Bomber. And there was Bomb Squad. There were great games that really stood out from the pack. But it was a business, and they weren't making the bottom line. They lost, I think, $200 million after the other company had come out with that lousy ET game, and Mattel just couldn't take those losses. They cut us loose.
Well, do you have questions for us? I know, I'm sure I know you know about Gridspace and stuff, but
I know. I respect you enormously. You're doing great. You're doing great.
thank
Okay. I
you.
look
It's
forward
been
to
a
it.
pleasure. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sandra. Bye.
Bye-bye.